Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Mohammed Kantawi and I am a university teacher. In this episode, I shall be talking about a new series which is about grammar, and it is titled Grammar and Grammar's Eccentricities. That means I'm going to be speaking about the lessons of grammar, and then I'm going to be giving you some strange things and ideas or ideations about grammar. So in this episode I shall be talking about 5 points. First, the definition of grammar. How do we define grammar? The second point will be about the lessons of grammar. The third point will be about the attitudes towards grammar, the attitudes of teachers and the attitudes of students, and my own attitudes. And the fourth point would be about the lessons that I'm going to be giving you in this series, and there are nearly 12 lessons. And the last point will be about my own opinions. So let's begin. The first point is about the definition of grammar. How do we define grammar? If you check different dictionaries, they will tell you that grammar is a set of rules or structures that can be used in language to govern it in communication and writing, in speaking and writing and pronunciation. Because we are supposed to take the word grammar in general as linguistics, and that means we should contain within grammar phonology and syntax and morphology and pragmatics and semantics, all this stuff which can be used in writing and in communication, both. And by the end of this session I shall be giving you my own definition of grammar. That is the definition that can be used or that can be found in different books, reference books of grammar. The second point is about the types of grammar, and there are nearly 10 types of grammar. I think some of you don't know about that. Maybe they know only 3 types or 2 types, but there are nearly 10 types. But in this series I shall be talking about only 5 types. Those 5 types can be talked about profoundly and sporadically. That means you will find the flex of those types throughout my lessons. The 5 types of grammar that I'm going to be giving you in this series are the following. The first one is pedagogical grammar. The second one is generative grammar. And the third one is transformational grammar. And the fourth one is mental grammar. And the last one is performance grammar. Now let me explain those 5 different types of grammar. Now the first type, as you can notice, pedagogical grammar, is the grammar that is intended in schools to teach those students who are non-native speakers of the language, like our students in Algeria and in the Arab world. It is a pedagogical grammar. And the nature of this grammar is that it is standardized. It is conducive to the idea of teaching and learning. So our students are going to be taught a standardized grammar, or which I prefer to call the BBC English or the Queen's English, though I see the difference between BBC English and the Queen's English. The second type is the generative grammar. And as you may know the word, generative, you can take the verb generate. So that means this kind of grammar is generated from within. So the word, generative grammar, it means it's the grammar that is generated from the mental grammar inside the head or the brain of the speaker. The third type of grammar is the transformational grammar. And as you can note, the word, transformational, from the verb to transform. So there is something that we transform, like from active to passive, from statement, a declarative sentence, to a negative sentence. And that means transformation. We transform the affirmative sentence into the negative sentence, the active voice into the passive voice. The fourth type of grammar is the mental grammar. And the mental grammar is the key point. It is the truth about grammar. It is the grammar that is in the minds of all speakers, and it is there, created by God. It means that there is something called predisposition. All people around the world are predisposed, endowed with a mental capacity to generate language using grammar. And the last type of grammar is the less important in truth, but the very important one in reality. Let me explain. When I say it is the less important in truth, because what is true is inside, which is the mental grammar, the generative grammar. While the performance grammar, as you can notice from the word perform, it means the grammar outside, the grammar of communication, the grammar in use. So it is very important in communication, but it is not important in itself. So which one of those grammars is more important in itself? Certainly, I believe it is the mental grammar. It is the grammar that is pure, that is raw, that is natural, that is innate. So these are the 5 types of grammars. And as I told you, I'm going to be speaking about them sporadically and profoundly in my lessons. The third point in this episode is about the attitudes of students and teachers and my own attitudes towards grammar. So in my opinion, some students or some teachers deal with grammar with a certain amount of reverence, particularly teachers at secondary schools and middle schools, and some teachers at university. They show ample reverence and deference to grammar. They respect it. And this is one attitude. Some of those teachers only love grammar. They are interested in grammar. They don't show much devotion to it. It's just a simple kind of love towards grammar. But some other teachers that I simply don't know why, but there are some teachers who show some kind of benign indifference to grammar. They are kind of indifferent to grammar. What's important for them is the message. If they could get across, if they could get their messages across in communication or in the process of teaching and learning, that will do. It doesn't matter really to speak about a grammar. For them, it doesn't matter to speak about grammar in such a way of reverence and deference. Now, my own opinion or my own attitude towards grammar is that I show ample devotion to grammar, ample reverence to grammar, majestic deference to grammar. I consider grammar to be something that is divine. It's not simply the grammar that we see in books and we see in communication. When people speak about, when people use their language, I consider it very, very divine and very important, very fundamental. Let me say, very indispensable to life. I can say this: I consider grammar to language as the soul to the body. That's my own attitude. And so that means I show much interest, much reverence, much deference, much respect to grammar. The fourth point that I shall be talking about are the lessons that I shall be giving you in this episode. And the lessons are nearly 12. Well, they are 12. There are 12 lessons in this episode. The first lesson is about parts of speech. You know, like, for example, the noun, the adjective, the verb, the adverb, the preposition, the articles, the conjunctions. The second lesson is about tenses. You know, when I say tenses, I don't mean only tenses, but tenses and aspects. So that means I shall be talking about the present simple, for example, the past simple, the difference between the present simple and the present continuous. And as you can notice, the word, simple and continuous are aspects. Because I personally believe, as in some books in Britain, that we do not have 3 tenses, we have only 2 tenses, the present and the past. and we have different aspects, but you find them in different books with different kinds of terminology. But the ones that are very, very common are the following: the continuous or the progressive aspect, the simple aspect, and the perfective aspect. In some books you find the perfect. So I shall be talking about tenses. That's the second lesson. The third lesson is about passivization, the passive voice. How do we turn a sentence from the active voice to the passive voice? And that means I shall be talking about passivization simplistically. It means the passive voice that can be given to kids at middle schools and secondary schools. And I shall be talking about the passivation at university. That means philosophically. There are other points within passivization that some of you don't know, and I shall be explaining them deeply. Lesson number 4 is about infinitivity. And I prefer to use the ity by the end. I could have said infinitive, simply infinitive. But I prefer to say infinitivity because I'm going to be including in this series, or in this series, the lessons of grammar with philosophy. So I chose the word infinitivity from the word infinitive. I shall be giving the definition of infinitive, the uses of infinitive, the nature of infinitive, the functions of infinitive, and the types, the 3 types of infinitive. Lesson number 4 is gerundity. Now, gerundity and infinitivity, they are nearly the same, not exactly the same, but many of the functions they do share give you the impression that they are nearly the same. So gerundity is from gerund or gerund. It's the verb plus ing standing as a noun, as a nominalized aspect. Like, for example, speaking, swimming, writing, playing, communicating. Lesson number 5 is about participiality. Now, as you can note, the word participiality is from the participle. You know, the 2 kinds of participles, the present participle and the past participle. The past participle is known. You know, students who check the list of irregular verbs, they know that, the infinitive and the past tense and the past participle. It can be with ed if it is regular, or no ed if it is irregular. And the second type of participiality is the ing form. And we shall be seeing the difference between gerundity and participiality, because they share the ing form here. So the gerund in general is always a noun, while the present participle can be a verb or an adjective or an adverb, and that's the difference for now. Lesson number 6 would be about modality. I shall be talking about modality in a very, very philosophical way. Yeah, certainly I shall be giving some kind of simplistic lessons about modal verbs, which can help you in communication and writing. Added to that is the amount of philosophizing about modality. I shall be talking about the definition of modality and the types of modality and the functions of modality. I shall be talking about the epistemic modality and the deontic modality. Let's take some examples of functions of modality. Like, for example, possibility, ability, propensity, deduction, obligation, advice. So these are some of the functions of modal verbs, different modal verbs. Lesson number 7 would be about conditionality. Now, conditionality is from condition. I shall be talking about the 4 types of conditionals, and in some books you find 3 types only, but I believe that there are 4 types, the 0 and the type 1 and type 2 and type 3. I shall be talking about them in details in due time. Lesson number 9 would be about subjunctivity. I shall be talking about the definition of subjunctivity, how do we define subjunctivity, the subjunctive case, and the two types of subjunctivity, or the two types of subjunctive. The were subjunctive, verb to be in the past, were subjunctive, and the mandatory subjunctive. And when we speak about the mandatory subjunctive, we're talking here about two things. The use of some adjectives, like for example, necessary, crucial, important, fundamental, with the that clause, the nominal clause, the that clause. For example, it is important that you watch Mr. Kantawi's series. Or let's choose the pronoun he to make it clearer for you what is the subjunctive case. It is important that Tifu watch Kantawi's lessons. And I chose the word, Tifu, it's the name of my student. But in some cases you find that we can use either adjectives and verbs, both in the subjunctive, in the mandatory subjunctive. So there are two types. The were subjunctive and the mandatory subjunctive. Lesson number 10 would be about prepositionality. And as you can note, the word prepositionality is taken from the word preposition. And this is a new lesson to you, maybe you don't know about it. It's about the idea how verbs through history have changed into prepositions, like the verb according, like the preposition according, like the preposition pending, like the preposition during, ing form. So it gives you the impression that they were verbs in the past and they changed. And then they, what I prefer to call them is, like in some books, they would say it is the deverbalisation of the verb, to deverbalize the verb, to make it a preposition. And we call this phenomenon prepositionality. And that's the lesson number 10. Lesson number 11 would be about combinability. And combinability is a new lesson, certainly it's a new lesson for you, maybe you don't know about it. It's about the idea of combining words, particularly nouns, adjective, adverbs, together in a particular language. Whether it is applicable to use this adjective and this noun together in this language, whether native speakers consider that natural to use it. Let's take an example. Is it possible to say a huge evidence? Is it possible to say a huge confidence? And is it possible to say a huge diffidence? We shall be talking about that in due time in the lesson about prepositionality. The last point is about compositionality. Now, compositionality is not about the combining of words together in a phrase, but it is about the syntactic sentence. How do we combine sentences? And it is about the idea, it's about the idea of the meaning that can be extracted from the sentence through the meanings of the constituents or the parts. For example, how do I know the meaning of Peter likes English? I certainly know the meaning of Peter likes English through knowing the meaning of Peter as a noun, a person, and likes as a verb, and English as a direct object. And it's not only that, because sometimes when we say Peter likes English, people listen to us in a very simplistic way, and they directly grasp the idea. But it is deeper than that. When we speak about, when we try to philosophize about it, we would say, does Peter like? Is it applicable for Peter to feel that feeling of liking? Yes, it is applicable for Peter to feel that feeling of liking. And English, is it likable? Can be liked by people? Can English be liked by people? Yes, it's a language that can be liked, although it's an abstract notion, but it can be liked. So we said that this kind of compositionality is safe and sound and acceptable and applicable by native speakers. It is a natural sentence. That's compositionality. So you can see the difference between combinability, from the verb to combine, combinability, and compositionality. Combinability is about combining words in phrases, particularly noun phrases, adjective phrases, adverb phrases, blah blah blah. So these are the lessons that I shall be talking about. There are 12 lessons. Let's repeat them. First, I shall be talking about parts of speech. Lesson 2 about tenses. Lesson 3 about passivization. Lesson 4 about Lesson 3 about passivization. Lesson 4 about infinitivity, and then gerundity, and then participiality, and then modality, and then conditionality, and then subjunctivity, and then prepositionality, and then combinability, and then compositionality. So there are 12 lessons that I shall be launching in this series. And I promise you that I shall be talking about them deeply, to make you feel that there are things that we were ignorant about, and we could know them, and we feel the pleasure to know them. So that's it. The last point in this episode is about my opinions about grammar. So, maybe I told you at the beginning of the session that I consider grammar to be divine. And because of the reality in the Western society that most of them are materialistic, and I told you maybe at the beginning of this session that I believe grammar to be divine. And due to the reality in the Western society, so that most of them are materialistic and pragmatic and pragmatists, they try to strip grammar from its divinely galvanizing coat. So there's a certain coat on grammar that is divine, but people in the Western society, and even here, people in the Arab world, try to strip grammar from its galvanizing divine coat. And I believe that because they would tell you, don't care about grammar. Use language as you like. But that's a danger, particularly in writing. When you write, you have to respect grammar. Even when you speak, try to respect it. Try to show some kind of interestedness in doing the grammar, the correct one. So those are the points that I spoke about in my episode today, and let's repeat them. So we spoke about the definition of grammar, we spoke about the types of grammar, and I said that there are 10 types of grammar, and I chose only 5. And then we spoke about the attitudes of teachers and students, and my own attitudes towards grammar. And then we spoke about the lessons that I'm going to be launching in this series. And then the last point was about my own opinions about